To answer your question about the difference between how we take care of TBI and PTSD and how the VA might take care of PTSD and TBI is a conceptual understanding first. I don't believe in PTSD because if you look at all the veterans coming back, you ask them, have you had any kind of trauma? Now, trauma is what has to be defined. Have they had blast trauma? Have they had penetrating injury? Have they had their head knocked? Were they in a vehicle that rolled down an embankment of 50 feet after an IED, exploded? And the difference is with PTSD, it's no trauma. No history of trauma, no physical trauma, none whatsoever. It's pure psychiatric. So when you look at us, what we do is we define that. Is there a physical component which will cause the TBI to be the diagnosis that we use, or is no physical trauma and it's PTSD? The VA, on the other hand, looking at the literature that came out from 2012 on, 410 people returned. They gave 380,000 of them medication because they all had PTSD. Because they looked at the end point of their complaints. They had 380,000 vets going to VAs around the country complaining of all these symptoms that were depressive in nature, that were anxiety, that were night terrors, social anxiety, withdrawn and so forth, crying, inability to maintain a relationship or to work. And they said, okay, that's PTSD. They never went to the beginning to find out what precipitated the appearance of PTSD.
The root cause.
The root cause, absolutely, the root cause. And that root cause is the trauma.
Okay, so I wanted to get into how you are treating it differently,
right.
Not using psychotropic drugs.
Right.
A would be that, but let's start back maybe one step back, talking about a baseline. There's a lot of talk about baseline. I mean, is it something the military, and could it be a cost-effective thing if they ran like baselines on people who go into the service? So if they come back from the war zone, you have something to look at to see what their normal levels were, the hormone levels and things of that nature, or is that just too rational?
That's rational, but the point is, my normal is different than your normal, than his normal, than his normal, than everybody's normal. And we use this contrived system that's called reference range or normal reference range, which according to some major statisticians, biostatisticians back in 1975, stated that the way that we determine the quote-unquote normal ranges is irrelevant to me. It's relevant to that group that they did it on. So we use a totally different method of interpretation, and that interpretation has allowed us to capture more people who have hormonal deficiency that looks, by looking at the numbers, it looks like they're okay. But I didn't go into medicine to treat numbers, I went in to treat people.
Yeah.
So the baseline testing, I don't need it.
You don't? Okay.
No. What I need is the testing right now that says, okay, here are the results, and based on these results, you have a deficiency of this neurosteroid, this neurosteroid, and your insulin's elevated. That's what I need to have now so I can move forward in treatment. What happened, way back when, it's irrelevant for now.
Okay.
I think it's unnecessary.
So now you just want to stabilize and amp those hormones. Is that in essence what you're doing?
Replenishment. It's not supplement, it's replenishment. Replenishing it to the level that's optimal for the patient.
Okay, so do the TBI, does the brain not, and we know the brain remaps itself continually, does it not reproduce the hormone level then? Or?
Great question. What happens is we're forgetting or we're missing a very important component of the traumatic brain injury story. In traumatic brain injury, let's say you're hit on the head. When you're hit on the head, the area that is contused becomes inflamed, and blood vessels start leaking hemoglobin into the area, red blood cells, and a chemical reaction happens. Inflammatory chemistry is produced, and that inflammation is what we're not addressing. And it's that chronic inflammation that's now being talked about, where it could account for 17 years of a slow, stealth, signature wound that happens in our veterans and happens in civilians.
Yeah, and civilians being athletes, car accidents, slip and falls. I mean, this potentially could help the entire population. So why are we
Absolutely.
using this more then?
I don't know. It's been in the literature. I mean, the stuff that I've been reading from Dr. Bailou in Paris, France from 1986 talked about this chemistry in the brain, which is called neurosteroids. Neurosteroids are the hormones that are produced in the brain. They're the same hormones that are produced in the adrenal glands or in the testicles or the ovaries or the thyroid gland. And they need to be produced in the brain because they have a different functioning. The ones from our periphery have a genetic manipulation, and the ones that are produced in our brain have a cellular manipulation where it immediately onset and benefits of action. And we're finding things like pregnenolone, which comes from cholesterol. So if we interrupt cholesterol production, we lose pregnenolone. Pregnenolone is what keeps us from anxiety. It stabilizes our moods. Alzheimer's disease has a deficiency of these hormones in the frontal area of the brain, and that's why personality changes. So we're missing the relationship between the inflammation causing damage to our hormone production in the brain.
Okay, there you
Okay.
go. Yeah, that's very understandable.
Yeah.
So
And that's the crux of it.
That's where you're finding the
Right.
but finding the balance, I guess, of how much of the hormones one person needs. As you said, it goes to this person's different
Right.
than that. So explain the process of how you go about finding what they're deficient in.
The initial premise was if the hormonal regulatory system in the brain is functioning appropriately, they should be at a certain level relative to the hormone production that they do in the periphery. For instance, the thyroid stimulating hormone stimulates my thyroid gland to produce an adequate amount of something called T4 or L-thyroxine, and that becomes the active form called T3. And if there is a damage to my regulatory mechanism in the brain, the thyroid won't get the signal to say, make thyroid. So you'll see that the brain's hormone is low, and the thyroid production in the periphery from the thyroid gland is low. And that tells me that there's been damage to the brain. So the pairing up of these different hormones for the brain and the ovaries, the brain and the testicles, the brain and the adrenal glands, we look at them in pair. And when we see either one high, the other low, or both low, it tells the story of was there significant damage to the brain to interrupt the regulation of hormone production.
Okay, and how are you treating with the hormones? I mean, this isn't a synthetic, I
No.
presume. This is a hormone. So
90
how are you getting that?
90% of what we use are natural products. We treat the neurosteroid, which are the brain hormones, and the neuroactive steroid, which are the steroids, which are the ones that come from our periphery. We treat that with 100% natural products that are plant-based, that are FDA approved, that are prescription. So our testosterone comes from Mexican wild yams, our estrogen, progesterone, all this comes from nature. And then maybe 10% of everything we use is a real prescription product that is, either a synthetic or something like Clomid or Amantadine.
And that might be for like the insulin or something to treat something like that, or is
Well,
that just also
it's interesting.
like help the chemical balance?
It helps with the chemical balance, but it's interesting what you said about the insulin. There is a relationship between inflammation of an area of the brain called the hypothalamus and the onset of a form of type 2 diabetes where insulin is produced very high but can't be used. They call it metabolic syndrome. So we have about a dozen patients right now that had this diabetes that's now normal by correcting the deficiency.
And you're also, Andrew was talking about also like a nutrition plan where you're getting people to like start eating a little healthier and
Correct.
whatnot. Now is that also just
That's
like follow up just to kind of keep the everything in place that you have set and
Well,
correct?
it's part of the entire picture. Hormones is a part of it, neurosteroids is a part of it, good nutrition is a part of it, exercise is a part of it. My daughter, who's graduating, in fact, in 2 weeks from Bastyr University, she has her history in nutritional medicine and food technology, and then went to Bastyr University, a naturopathic, and she has this love for the gut-brain relationship. So,
How sure she got that from?
well, let's put it this way. she went beyond on that, okay? And some of the stuff that she's taught me from her area, her vista, has allowed one of our patients to lose 32.4 pounds in 5 weeks.
Wow.
Wow.
Just changing the way
probiotics, certain supplements, eating correctly, getting rid of all the glutens in the diet, and drinking adequate amount of water. So anyway, Allison will be coming into the practice to address functional medicine and nutrition because it's an important component between brain and gut. And we're finding more and more that the gut, how healthy you keep your gut, influences the brain's functioning.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so tell me a little bit about your reaching out to the VA and suggesting that you've had 1,200 patients that have gone through here that have seen relief from their symptoms. And what's your interaction been with the VA, if you can just explain it briefly?
Well, interaction with the VA has been minimal at best, even though I've tried to, I've reached out, and through people that we've helped, they've helped me to get to people that are up there on the chain, even the secretary, and sent a proposal where I will pay out of my pocket for 50 or 100 veterans to go through our program if they would pay for the intake, meaning they do their workup of them from a psychiatric, psychological standpoint, and then the exit evaluation, and then see if the results work.
Yeah.
And if they work, return my money and give me enough money to take care of 2,000 people in a pilot program. That's it. So I haven't heard a response yet, and sent the letter a couple of times, and had some people go to, sit at a table with the secretary and try and get us, to be acknowledged. It hasn't happened yet. Time will do.
Yeah, I think that this is going to be a policy issue, and the protocol with the VA has to follow the certain prescribed protocol that, as the VA pointed out in an email to me today, that was set in 2007. Apparently we don't, 7 years, 8, 10 years later, we don't, it doesn't matter, they don't want to look at the new science. But
it's not new science, it's old science that's being applied.
That's actually,
it's the application of great science that's been shown to work.
So why did you go off into this direction with TBI? I mean, this is kind of something I think a lot of people now know it because of the wars in the Middle East, but before then we really didn't talk about TBI.
Yeah, let's see. Between the ages of about 34 and 47, I developed some depression, wasn't happy. And I went and had hormone testing at a company in Las Vegas, and they found that I was 3 hormones deficient. Well, my history of 5 head traumas in the past really didn't play an informative part at that time in 1997. It wasn't until about 2004 when I was working on a new lecture on the brain and hormones that I came across my epiphany article, which was from Turkey, where there was an article about pugilists who had this incredible high occurrence of growth hormone deficiency. And when I read it, it was like, aha, if head trauma can cause growth hormone deficiency, how about other hormones? So I started looking at the literature, and there it was. It was there. Growth hormone, testosterone, thyroid, cortisol, they were all influenced. So in 2004, I realized that the reason in 1997 for my 3 hormone deficiencies was because of the head traumas that I had during my 4 years of age, hit by a car at 11 to 12, swimming accident, being almost drowned at 4 years of age, and all these things additively led up to the obesity and depression. I was on antidepressants. So within 3 months of being on a replacement protocol or replenishment protocol, my entire life changed.
And like Andrew says, he woke up or actually when he was left the office, he said he was driving and he's like, I don't care if it's a placebo, I'm taking this the rest of my life. He woke up, his life came back. To see that and to see Adam and interview them and spend time with them, extraordinarily, they're just great individuals anyways. their organization, you're gonna, actually help them with their foundation. And, it seems like it's a mutual, he credits you for saving his life and pulling, and getting him back because he doesn't know that he would make it. Is there, how many other people do you think that would benefit from a program like this if the VA would allow this to open up?
Well, their records show, in an article in, I think, New York Times, 380,000 vets returning with PTSD.
Yeah.
Which is really mild.
And you think it might be a misdiagnosis, you think?
I don't think it's a misdiagnosis. No? I don't think it's correct. I don't think.
Why don't you think that?
Because if you go back to each and every one of them and you ask a simple question, have you been exposed to any kind of blast trauma, repetitive gunfire, blast, what do they call it, flash bangs or anything? I was in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and I was at their close quarters rooms, and I was on 12 feet up, standing on the catwalk with a flak jacket on and a helmet on, and when they breached a door, I felt the blast wave. And I'm going, no way!
So there's a pattern, so there's like a range.
Right.
There's a range.
In last year, the year before, 2014, I think it was on Dr. Drew's show with a patient who was a military, he was an Army medic. 2 tours of duty, not a scratch on his body. He comes home and 18 months later he's on 2 or 3 antidepressants, lack of libido, lack of interaction with people, depressed, angry, moody, sleeping, withdrawn, everything. And he ends up seeing one of the shows that we did and comes in as a patient from San Diego. And we find that he has 2 1/2 hormone deficiencies. The 1/2 means partial.
Yeah.
It's not full-blown like the other 2. So what happened was we put him on treatment. He's off his antidepressants, feeling great. He had 0 cuts or injuries to his body, but he was walking around Abramson tanks as they discharged their shells, which causes a shuddering.
Yeah.
So absolutely no physical trauma.
They say that this can be a silent killer because you don't demonstrate. A lot of times it can take up to 2 years for the injury I would imagine the hormones now, for all of those to deplete the body, and it takes time.
Inflammation, hormones, it's all, it's not one, it's the whole gemisch, the whole accumulation of the impact of trauma. Scientific American, I think it was in January, had an article where they actually were able to model external blast effect on neurons in the brain, and it shows like you had a stretched piece of plastic and you push your finger in it and it causes that peaking, and then it punches a hole through it.
Do you want to ask a question, quick? Yeah.
One of the things I was talking to Andrew about the other day is one of the things that we do in the military is we determine the size of the bomb we're going to use to kill or disable depending on the number of people, the terrain, and whatever else.
Sure.
Could you talk just a little bit about the difference of impact traumatic brain injury and concussive or shock wave?
Yeah. Blast wave, when you have an explosive device going off, it generates what they call 5 blast wave effects. Air-filled organs like the lungs, the sinuses, the ear canals from that blast wave can be totally ruptured. But what we're finding on a subcellular level is disruption, well, it's a cellular level, disruption of cells. And it actually can cause perforation of neurons without damage to the cranium, to the skull. There's no holes, there's no penetrating lesions. It's the wave, it's energy. So the conservation of energy says that it can be changed, but it can't be, destroyed. So
you're finding,
correct.
It's silent in the...
It's silent. So they talk about the silent epidemic, or the silent wound, or the stealth wound, and it's all from these blast injuries. I have police officers that are at what do they call Hogan's Run, where they practice every year with their certification or qualifications for their shotgun. And I've had a couple of guys who have developed very subtle personality changes, mood changes, and it turns out they had hormone deficiency. Never had a car accident, never had this, never that, never that. It's just from the training. Also, we've coined a term which is called combat trauma syndrome. These are guys that haven't had any kind of physical trauma, but in the course of their training, parachuting, repetitive machine gun, flashbangs, hand grenades, they've got some of the percussive waves or the blast wave that has created problems. And, you know, we have one, I think you might have met Zach, a 23-year-old who, Zach. Phenomenal case. Happy as can be now, as opposed to depressed, suicidal as he was before. Wasn't even out in Iraq or Afghanistan, no place.
Well, I mean, we just in Fort Hood lost 9 soldiers that they're tipped over. I mean, a lot of the guys do get injured during training. I mean, that's before they even send them, and even in peacetime we lose a lot of soldiers and whatnot. So, okay, let me ask you. What kind of medical publications and journals have you been published in with your research? Because I'm assuming that you've written about some of your patients that have gone through here and what they were like when they came in.
The only thing I have right now are 3 books out.
Okay.
One book is called Interventional Endocrinology. It was the beginning of my story of understanding about hormones and how they influence different aspects of our functioning. Another term that could have been used for that book is anti-aging medicine, but I don't really believe in anti-aging. What I do believe in is good medicine. There's no such thing as anti-aging medicine. There's just good medicine. And then the next one was a digital traumatic brain injury, where I took about 10 years worth of research and reading and patient experience and put it into a book that discusses what we found and what the literature I used to support why I went in that direction. And as I continued in this direction, new literature was coming out. So as far as articles written, I do not have any that have been published right now. There are a couple in the works. I spend most of my time with patient care than it is with trying to get fame and glory out of writing articles and so forth.
I was going to ask you what you found, if you found your fellow doctors receptive to what you're, setting aside the VA, but just, regular doctors, are they receptive to this treatment? Or are they wanting to, to start writing the scripts for Big Pharma?
There's a learning curve. Everybody starts out at a starting point and then based upon their education achieves a new level of understanding. Right now, because of the environment of medicine right now, I don't think many really have the time to go and look at the science and to find cause to alter that writing of the prescription.
And why is that though? I mean, if you see people like Andrew and you see, you obviously have seen them when they're at their lows and they are just, on death's door, and then you see the dramatic shift. Why isn't medicine more receptive to something that you're putting into the body that's natural over synthetic?
Right. There are different mindsets for physicians. There are early adapters and there are late adapters, and then things in between. There are more late adapters who wait until there's a plethora, which is a word that Andrew loves saying, a plethora. So I had a discussion about that with someone else about his use of plethora, which is a great word.
It's a great word.
It's a great word. Superfluous, excessive, and teeming and stuff. But there's a plethora of guys that want to have lots of research, double-blind, crossover, scientific papers written about how this stuff works.
Is that for medical malpractice reasons?
No,
or
it's convincing people that it really works. So here's what we do is, here are 123 veterans with their testimonials pre and post. Look at what medication they were on before, what they were suffering was with, how their relationship is or was with their wife, their children, their job, their church, their God. And you see now the difference. as one of the, Dan, I was just with him in Phoenix when I was lecturing for an organization. Dan is a gentleman who was suicidal, and he came into our program. He was pushed into the program for rapid access, and within 2 weeks his entire life started changing. And he would go to the VA for his support meetings and so forth, and while he was there he was telling his buds about how great he was feeling and what he was doing, and one of the guys said, that's only because the doctor wants to sell you all these supplements and so forth. He says, if it was placebo, this is the best I felt on placebo in 5 years.
Yeah.
I'll take it.
Yeah, that's what Andrew was saying. That he didn't care what it was, and he just knew that he
That's right.
he found that he woke up and he just
Correct.
was living again, and
Correct.
was able to go out. And now his mission, of course, is to go help
Right.
veterans that have suffered this and try to
Mhm.
get the protocols changed so more people can do this. Now, let me ask you a quick question. You've run into a problem with the state of California with taxes on something. Are you willing to talk about,
No.
No? Okay.
Not until after I have the meeting in 45 minutes or so.
I gotta try.
Yeah,
try.
because I don't know how to answer it. I'm hoping that George will be, receptive
He's a
and
good guy, though.
compassionate about what I'm doing and find an answer. My analytical projection is that because of the way that things are structured, there's nothing straightforward he can do, so we're going to have to do a workaround.
And he's done that, and let him know that I came by and interviewed you. He'll remember who I am.
Mhm.
Anyways, let me ask you this. What kind of role does Big Pharma play in this? Do you think that they're playing an active role behind the scenes? Do you think that they're lobbying the congressman? Because obviously, when you're giving someone like Andrew, who went into the premier TBI facility with 6 medications, came out with 13, seems like there's a little bit of a, it just, you would think that the Army, the Navy, Air Force, whatever, they would want to get them off the drugs, not add more to the cocktail. So what do you think what the role is of Big Pharma here? Do you think that they're playing any active role, or do you think that it's just kind of a subliminal that this is what's going on?
Mhm. Well, I think what's happening out there, not to point a negative finger at anybody, but I think what's happening is based upon the level of responsibility that the VA has accepted in terms of what to do with the vets that are suffering with PTSD and TBI. This is the playing field that they're on. So on that playing field, you've got pharma, you've got MRI centers, CT centers, all these centers that want to do these sophisticated SPECT scan, PET scans, MUGA scans, and all these scans to assess the problem that's in the brain. And that's okay. What we're offering is another level where you don't need that. You don't need to do CT scans, MRI, PET scans, because they don't influence what we're going to do.
Okay.
They have absolutely no impact.
So they don't provide a complete picture, is what you're saying?
Well, they don't, what, the radiographic studies or
Yeah.
the neuroradiology?
Yeah.
No, they provide a lot of understanding of what the damage did to the brain, but is that going to direct us in how to fix them?
Yeah, exactly.
No, that's it. I have stopped.
Yeah.
5 years ago, I stopped doing any kind of neuroradiological procedures because it really, at the bottom line, is expensive, and that money can be used to treat and heal the person or to improve their quality of life. Radiographic, how is that going to help someone feel better?
Yeah.
Oh, I've got this lesion in this part of the brain that is it's not going to help.
Go ahead, you have a question?
Yeah, what about the effect that psychotropic drugs have on the brain itself? With what you're doing, wouldn't that also have an adverse effect on the brain because it suppresses certain aspects of the brain?
Beautiful question. What we're finding is, let me back up and tell a short story. Matthew Gosney, who was on the Joe Rogan
I know
574,
who he is.
he was on 16 medications. He was a medic in the Army, embedded in Navy SEALs, gets blown up, 6 pins in the jaw, shrapnel on the left side of the head, right leg blown out or shot out from under him. And he comes back home and he slowly increases in his medication. He's on 16 medications. He's in psychotherapy, physical therapy twice a week. And in January 2014, on all these medications, with all these support things, attempts suicide. Ends up in Tacoma, Washington, VA lockdown, and he hears, the first Joe Rogan program. He comes in, and he starts treatment, and he's off of 14 of the 16 medications in 6 weeks. So some of the medication was OxyContin. He was taking 80 milligrams a day. Another one's morphine sulfate. He was taking 460 milligrams a day. Another medication was fentanyl patch for pain.
Well, we've seen all these people die of lately.
Correct. And he was on Adderall to counteract that effect. He was on Celebrex for the pain. He was on Valium at night. He was on Trazodone at night because of the Adderall didn't allow him to sleep. So he's, in 6 weeks, gets off 14 of the 16 medications without any withdrawal. So to come back to your question.
But you added hormones to balance that out.
No. What happened was he was placed onto the neurosteroids to help protect his brain. Turns out, and I found this after the fact of seeing these cases where they're on high dose of narcotics, they're off of them.
They don't need them.
Without withdrawal. So I go back to the literature, and it says that the pregnenolone, the pregnenolone sulfate, the testosterone, and so forth, all help to ease withdrawal from narcotics.
Yeah, because normally you would say, and when I did my segment, I did tell the people that are watching, if they are watching and they want to seek help,
Right.
go see their doctor. Don't just stop taking all the medications
Correct.
at once.
Correct.
I mean, I wanted to make
Correct.
that clear. So
Absolutely.
we did
Legal
say that.
responsibility.
Exactly, just so that was there, but that they could go online and learn about this. So
Right.
that's why, the station manager, he was like, let's do a 3-part series. Let's
Right.
dedicate the time to this that we need.
Okay.
And seeing Andrew and just seeing people who have been where he was before, and I didn't know Andrew before, but seeing him, I mean, I can't tell you, how infectious it was for me,
Right.
and that after all these years, I'm like, oh my gosh, there is actually something out there. There's something that can help, and it's like natural, hormones and things of that nature.
Well, it's pro-hormones and hormones, and also anti-inflammatory components like curcumin, which comes from turmeric. Curcumin has recently an incredible group of articles showing how it stops inflammation in the brain and can actually stimulate neurons to regenerate, causes regeneration. We know with another product, diindomethane, which is from green plants, cruciferous plants. Quercetin, which is a flavonoid, which helps with energy production in the brain. There are a lot of natural products out there that address the inflammation. There was an article about NAC, which is N-acetylcysteine, which is a precursor to glutathione, which is one of the most important anti-free radical scavenger in the brain, anti-inflammatory component in the brain, and another vitamin E. They found that the combination of vitamin E and this N-acetylcysteine lowers a chemical that is the trigger for inflammation in the brain, called NF-kappa beta. And phenomenal. It's accounting for our ability now to establish what we're calling a neuropermissive environment. What a neuropermissive environment is a brain that has the environment where it can regenerate.
Yeah, so it's kind of something to keep this could also be very helpful in Alzheimer's, it sounds
Correct.
like. We're seeing
if you're talking about Alzheimer's and what we do, there's a guy that I followed for many years. I'm at USC as an associate clinical professor, voluntary, in Keck School of Medicine, and there's a doc there, Christian J. Pike, who has written over 300 articles about androgens, which are DHEA, testosterone, DHT, and so forth, and Alzheimer's, and it helps to reverse it. And on the side, Parkinson's disease, if they're low in testosterone, you replenish it, they
can stop the shaking.
the intentional tremors, the pill rolling, the shuffling of the feet.
Yeah. Well, this is like revolutionary medicine that you're on track. Although you say it's been around,
It's
I know.
there.
It's just
already
putting
there.
it all together,
Yeah.
taking the
I've
pieces.
done nothing more than read. I love reading. I read, something like 8,500 articles to write this last book and put 1,600 of the articles into it. And in that literature, I see patterns, and those patterns showed the way to integrate anti-inflammatory with the neurosteroids with the steroid hormone replacement.
Now, is this something that if you get a patient on replacement therapy, is this something they're taking for the rest of their lives, or is this
Great
something?
question. Great question. You got a diabetic.
Yeah.
You put him on insulin.
Yeah.
Tell me when you're going to take him off.
Never,
Why?
because they're not going to be cured.
They're not going to, their body can't
Yeah.
produce it. So what we're doing right now, in the end of a third-year study, patient population, I shouldn't say study, I'm in a third-year observation. Because if it's an IRB that I need, if I'm doing a study, I'm not doing a study, I'm doing an observation. Where they're on a protocol, and at the end of a year, they'll be weaned off the protocol, and we'll monitor them to see if their system is still moving forward. And that came about with one of our veterans who is working for a private company and went back to the field of battle. And they stopped their treatment after 9 months, but when they came home 6 months later, their levels of their hormone was maintained just below where they were at the peak of being on their treatment.
So it's like it could be a maintenance program where they're
It
on
could-
some of it, but not a lot of
Correct.
it, just to continue to
Correct.
make sure. Because is there actually damage in the brain that will permanently cause some of this damage? Again, we're saying you're seeing regeneration. but
Well,
is this to like ensure that this?
I don't know. There are specific, I'm being trained in a neurofeedback, it's like an electroencephalogram of the brain. It's called the RETA technique, which can map out the brain and show areas of electrical activity. And in damaged areas, the electrical activity or the signal, alpha, delta, and so forth, are low. And if they're low, it means the area is not working. If you're, Andrew failed his test when he was at the, I think it was Carrick Center. He failed his, or here in California, he failed his neurofeedback in the mapping of his brain because it wasn't taking. And he just, after a year being on our protocol, went back and had it done, passed with flying colors. I gave a lecture for the International Society of Neurofeedback and Research. I was a keynote speaker in Denver in October of last year, and gave them a presentation on neurosteroids and neuroactive steroids. And at the end of the 45-minute lecture, I was in the hall for 3 hours answering questions. And one of the board of directors came up and said, you just blew us away because you answered so many of the questions that no one asked.
Yeah.
Why was it that they were failing on neurofeedback, which is a beautiful piece of equipment? Why is it that mapping didn't get better after 81 sessions with neurofeedback? And the reason is, if the circuit is broken,
You can't. You're working with a broken system.
it's broken. You need to fix the circuitry. So what we found is that things like testosterone, pregnenolone, UCLA doing a study on allopregnanolone, which is the active form of progesterone, it actually is neuroprotective, it stimulates nerve regeneration, it drops free radical inflammation in the brain. So in studies, the PROTECT, I'll just touch on the PROTECT study. There was a PROTECT study 1, 2, and 3. PROTECT study 1, Atlanta, Georgia, smart docs in emergency rooms started recognizing that women who were on hormone replacement therapy, that when they had head trauma, they fared better than women who were on nothing. So they did this study called PROTECT 1, where they gave progesterone, and they dropped mortality in 50%. And then they did a interim one, which was called the PROTECT 2, and jumped to the PROTECT 3. The PROTECT 3 came out and said, PROTECT 1 was wrong. It didn't work. The PROTECT 2 came out and said, the authors of it said, the reason why PROTECT 3 study failed is because they didn't use enough of the progesterone. So now, if you go to Google Scholar and you put in progesterone and brain trauma, you'll get 8,500 articles supporting, if not more, supporting the benefit of progesterone on the brain. And one article, PROTECT 3, that says it doesn't.
One article that says
So, yeah, Carl Sagan was one of my mentors. In my first book, I his paragraph about science being, you know, a balancing act between the stuff you can prove and the stuff you can't prove. Well, here's one article that says no, and 8,000 articles that say yes. So which one do you go with? How about this? Testosterone. 3 articles came out saying that testosterone increases cardiovascular disease, that has now caused a black box warning on testosterone by the FDA, because 3 articles, and if you look at the 280,000 articles talking about the protection of testosterone on the heart.
Yeah, so they look at the it's
there's
regulations.
There's a story behind it.
Okay, so it
Not
could
for
be
taping, but
yeah.
there's a story.
There's a story. I'll do a little research on that.
I'll give you the names of what to research.
There you go. That sounds
Well,
good.
isn't one of the issues, though, also the standard of care? Is Are you able to piggyback on some of this authenticated information and this research in order to try to elevate your program to the sense of being able to be eligible for grants and research money?
You know, the standard of care is one thing. Introducing a research project to elevate the standard of care is another thing. So they're not mutually, compatible. They're mutually exclusive until you get the science to support that it should be the standard of care. Okay? So,
What would it take for you to do something like that? I mean, if let's say someone
it's in
from
the
the
works.
VA said,
Yeah, we're in the
said,
process.
So you're in the process of doing that because
Here's what happened. This year, the DoD came out with some great concepts. And the greatest concept was the fact that all of their grant money was failing to produce results. Why was that? It's because there were monotherapy protocols. Now, the brain is too complex to have one thing fit for everybody.
Yeah.
So in the beginning of this year, they came out with a grant, I think it was $3 million grant, which is open. It's not closing, it's open. And the $3 million is for multi-therapeutic approach. Regimens that brought multiple of treatment regimens under one roof and one package, one protocol.
Okay.
And that's where we're at right now. We have through...
Is that through NIH or?
That's DoD.
Okay, so DoD
Through
is
the
probably,
DoD.
but they're probably going through it out there.
So there are 2 things that we're working on now, and that's
That's one
I
of
brought it to WAF and grant.gov, and one of them is this DoD grant, and the other one is one I sent them last week. Started a little program which is called SPAM, which is I can't even remember what it means, but it means it's a suicide prevention based upon significant others. I mean, we lost someone recently last week, and the wife was aware that the husband was going through this degradation spiral and subsequently committed suicide. And what we need to do is we need to educate the spouses
absolutely.
about this issue. Well, went to grants.com, did a little bit of looking around, and there's a grant for $600,000 which will allow for the establishment of a suicide prevention system. So what that system will be, I want to go out into the community, as I started doing last month in Phoenix, and start sharing the information in a very simplistic language, so that the attendees can go to their own doctor and ask their doctor to look into what we're doing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's
grassroots.
Yeah, so you are actively looking into getting this change, and I think that you're going to see Andrew be a good advocate for you when he goes back to the halls of Congress and starts talking to some of these congressmen and trying to get the changes, because that's where we're going to run into
it's going to take a long time, and therefore what we're trying to do is to establish private funding.
Yeah.
And that's with the foundation. That's really the key.
So you don't lose people between then and now, and once they see the success, we would hope that.
We have a suicidologist in Montana. Montana's a special state because they have 103,000 veterans. 15% of veterans end up in Montana, and therefore they have the highest suicide rate. So the suicidologist, Ed, contacted me, and we got into a conversation. I referred him to WAF so that maybe they can refer some of the people.
Yeah.
Well, Montana's congressman, senator congressman, his name is Ryan. Ryan, I want to say
Not Zink, not
Zinke.
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 Yeah. Sorry.
20 years.
Navy SEAL. Yeah.
Navy SEAL.
Yeah.
And he's trying to fight.
I interviewed him too.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, like a few years ago I did. Yeah.
And then, what's his name? Steve Bullock is the governor.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, he's the present governor, and not enough is being done. They're trying to figure out ways to getting, most of the guys are so destitute that they can't use their GI funding for, education. So why not take 1 year and invest it in their medical care?
Getting health.
Getting health.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we were talking with, you probably spoke with Richard Troxel from the House to Homeless organization.
Yeah.
We talked with John, what's John's last name, from Congressional Subcommittee on Housing the Homeless Veterans. There are 1 million vets that are incarcerated, 230,000 are females, and articles coming out, why are they incarcerated? Anger, lack of control of anger. It's like road rage.
Yeah.
But that's all it is. If you look at some of the symptoms that are associated with quote-unquote PTSD, which is really TBI, you'll see anger and mood swings as a very common occurrence. And therefore, they're in a situation, they get stressed and they explode.
Yeah.
And in exploding, they get arrested, incarcerated.
Yeah.
So they can't keep jobs, they get angry, they get into fight, they get incarcerated. So, been reaching out and talking with Richard. We've had now 2 conversations. Love to find a location where there are 10 homeless vets that are in a halfway house, get them assessed, get them on treatment, and see what happens to them.
Yeah.
I mean, you saw Andrew.
Yeah.
Andrew is not the person he was when he first came in here.
Yeah.
Totally different.
So-
Dynamic.
So what are your 3 takeaways from all this with dealing with the military and seeing that your protocols actually worked on, the guys that have made it in here? What are you?
Right.
What's your takeaway on this?
Well,
what can you tell people who are listening or watching right
those,
now?
Yeah, those that are veterans as well as those that are civilians, go talk to your doctor. Let them know that there's an option out there. If the doctor fails to offer to the veterans, or the VA fails to offer it, come see us at WAF, at Warrior Angel Foundation. If you're a civilian and you are unable to get your doctor to change the way that they've been treating you, look at our website. We're training doctors across the United States to participate, and we've got a very rigorous protocol or program where they have to go through our training program. I just gave one in Orlando. We had 42 people attending. 25% were veteran physicians, MDs, DOs in attendance. 15% were psychiatrists who realized that they're treating their people. And you know that black box on
Yeah.
all the medication, it says, be warned that if you
Yeah.
start this medication, your
Suicide.
depression gets worse and you can commit suicide faster than before.
Yeah. So why would you want to take something like that? Too?
I haven't the foggiest. I don't make comment on that. I don't make any comment on that.
Well, you
I'm
see it
not-
on TV all the time too.
I got it. I after
Yeah.
filming, I'll
Yeah.
give you my voiceover of one of them.
Yeah.
But I'm not here, and I don't want to villainize or demonize the pharmaceutical company, other physicians, other organizations that haven't recognized the alternative
Well,
treatments.
you just want them to know it's there so
It's
they
there.
can try it. If
Yeah,
they're
if they
if they're
look,
after
fine.
a year they're seeing
Yeah.
somebody who's not improving, they're getting worse, why not try something that might work?
Correct.
And it's
At
also
least
a lot
look at
less.
it.
At least, and it's also going to cost taxpayers
Correct.
a lot less.
For the first year of everything included for our program, supplements, medication, and so forth, it's about $5,000 for the first year. And then it drops down to maybe $3,500. And then the third year drops down to $2,500 to $1,500. And then thereafter at that amount. We're trying to get it even to drop by another 30% by having TRICARE take over the laboratories.
There you go.
Okay? Now, it took me 10 years to put together the TBI panel, And it, in chapter 6 of the book, it talks about how to interpret it. Because if you interpret it according to traditional medicine, you will miss the opportunity to come out looking like a hero to these guys. Because if they're, the great fallacy is, let's say there's a range of a chemical, a hormone, whatever, that's between 10 and 90. You come in at 11, the traditional doctor says what? You're within the goalposts. But if you know football, that kicker doesn't want it to hit that side. It wants it in the sweet center, right? Which is about professionalism, his accuracy, his quality of his kicking. So what we do is we take the 10 and 90, add it together, it's 100, divide by 2, and that's 50. That's called the median. So it's a statistical term. I didn't make it up.
Wait, I didn't go to that side of campus.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
fine. So my only C was in biostatistics. So I'm making up for it by now. So it's the midpoint that we try to bring them. And what's happening is they start out at 11, but as we're bringing them up slowly, because we're making an assumption everybody needs the median, we have people who are at 15, they're feeling great. 17, 23, 39, 47. They're feeling phenomenal, so there's no reason to take them to 50. But the people who have severe, moderate to severe, not mild, moderate to severe traumatic brain injury, they need a little bit higher.
And then as the brain fixes itself, then it can come back, tapers back up, is what you're saying.
We find in about 6 months that we can drop, let's say, for instance, testosterone by about 25%. And we use physiological dosing. The thing that really freaks me out is that a male's body produces between 4 and 10 milligrams of testosterone a day. And that's 28 to 70 milligrams per week. And why is it that docs out there are giving 100, 200, 300 milligrams of injectable testosterone a week, or every 2 weeks, or every 3 or 4 weeks? Because they don't understand the physiology of the body. And then they give estrogen blocking drugs, anastrozole. Now, what's a side effect of anastrozole? It shuts down estrogen that you need for the brain, for the immunity, for the blood flow, for the dilation of blood vessels, for stimulation of growth hormone production. So you artificially raise, or super physiologic, excessive amount of testosterone, and you put another medication in that shuts off other benefits. Nothing is free in what we do. You got to pay the price at some point. So what we do is we try to
and everybody's individualized,
Correct.
as you said. Everybody has
Correct.
like we have an individual thumbprint.
Correct.
The brain is no different.
Yeah, I have stamps. They're usually airline stamps or postal stamps, but I have no stamp in the office for treatment. Everybody comes in looking at their history of 21 pages that we collect, looking at their history, looking at the medication they're on. I mean, as a courtesy, sensitive courtesy, I look at how they injured themselves. I say, oh, okay. But it's really in the laboratory tests that will dictate everything we do, okay, and how to move forward.
Thank you so much, Doctor. That was awesome, awesome, awesome. I'm really pleased. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we're going to turn the camera off.